Let's open PCHH, include D311 on 12H, DWrite_2H, D2D1_3H, Gamepad H, Keyboard H, go to App H, include 2D FPS Text H, 2D Xbox One button H, 2D Xbox One View button H, 2D Keyboard button H, 2D Label H, and Common Step Timer H. To app, add a FPS texture pointer, a step timer, a gamepad unique pointer, a button state tracker, a share pointer for Xbox One button A, Xbox One button B, Xbox One button X, and Xbox One button Y, and another one for Xbox One B button. Add a keyboard unique pointer, a keyboard state tracker, and a share pointer for keyboard button A, keyboard button S, keyboard button D, keyboard button P, and keyboard button L. Add share pointers for the labels of the ambient, directional, spot, and point lights, and 2 more labels for the illumination models. Add flags for the 4 lights. Go to the run function in app CPP. After process events, add a timer tick. Get the state of the gamepad, the state of the keyboard, call buttons update, passing the state of the gamepad, and call keys update, passing the state of the keyboard. If the gamepad is connected, if the A button was pressed, toggle the state of the first light, and do the same with the buttons B, X, and Y with the rest of the lights. If the B button was pressed, toggle the lighting mode. Do the same functionalities with the keyboard keys A, D, S, P, and L. If the spacebar was pressed, get the current view of the application, and if it's in full screen, exit the full screen mode, and if it's not, enter the full screen mode. If escape was pressed, finish the application. Modify the call to cube update constants buffer. If the ambient light is enabled, pass its color or a null vector if it's not. Do the same for the directional, spot, and point lights. After cube render, add a call to renderer, execute commands. A call to renderer, set 2D render target. A call to FPS text, render, passing the Direct2D1 device context and the number of frames per second of the application. If the gamepad is connected, declare an array of 2D points which will be used to position the gamepad buttons. Call to the render function for each button, passing the Direct2D device context, the drawing coordinates of each button, and if the button is pressed. Call to the label render functions, passing the device context, the drawing coordinates, and a string which tells if the light is turned on or off. When using the keyboard, draw the buttons passing the Direct2D1 device context, the drawing coordinates, and a ball to reflect if the key is pressed or not, for the keys A, D, S, P, and L. Again, call the render function of the light labels, passing the device context, the drawing coordinates, and a string which tells if the light is on or off. Move the call to render present to this block of code, and do the same with pix end event after present. In the set window function, after calling process events, create a gamepad, call buttons reset, create a keyboard, Assign the window to the keyboard with keyboard set window. After cube initialize, create FPS text and call its initialize method, passing the direct2d1 device context and a direct write factory. Create a label for the ambient light label using std_make_share and call its initialize function, passing the direct2d1 device context, a direct write factory, the font size, and the alignment style of the text. Do the same for the labels of the directional spot point light and the lighting models label. Create an A key using std_make_share of a keyboard button and call its initialize function, passing the direct2d1 device context, a direct write factory, the letter to represent, and the font color. Do the same for the keys S, D, P, and L. Create the gamepad A button using std_make_share of a Xbox One button and call its initialize function, passing the direct2d1 device context, a direct write factory, the button's letter, and the button's letter color. Do the same for the buttons B, X, and Y. Create the gamepad's view button using std_make_share of a Xbox One view button. Call its initialize function, passing the direct2d1 device context and a direct2d1 factory. Go to render H and after the command list, declare com pointers for ID3D11 device, ID3D11on12 device, ID3D11 device context, IDXGI device, ID2D1 factory 6, ID2D1 device 5, ID2D1 device context 5, an array of ID2D1 bitmap 1 with the number of frame as its size, an array of ID3D11 resource with the numbers of frames as its size, ID write factory. Add declarations for the set2D render target and execute commands functions. Go to renderer CPP and at the end of the initialize function, call to create DD3D11on12 device, passing the direct3D12 device, the command queue, the direct3D11 device, the direct3D11on12 device, the direct3D11 device context, and the DXGI device. Call create D2D1 device, passing the DXGI device, the direct2D1 factory, the direct2D1 device, and the direct2D1 device context. Create the factory with DWrite create factory, passing the factory type share, a UUID of ID write factory, and a pointer to the DWrite factory. Call to update D2D1 render targets, passing the D3D11on12 device, the direct2D1 device context, the render targets, the grab back buffers, and the direct2D render targets. In the destroy function, after releasing the fence, release DWrite factory, the direct2D render targets, the device context of direct2D1, the device of direct2D1, the factory of direct2D1, the grab back buffers, the DXGI device, the direct3D11 device context, the direct3D11on12 device, and the direct3D11 device. In the resize function, move the reset of the depth stencil after the fence's synchronization loop, and do a reset on the grab back buffers and the direct2D render targets. Assign the targets of direct2D1 device context as null pointer. Call the flash function of D311 device context, and at the end of the function, call to update D2D1 render targets, passing the D311on12 device, the direct2D1 device context, the render targets, the grab back buffers, and the direct2D render targets. After the renderer set render targets method, add the definition of renderer execute commands, taking the content from the renderer present method from the beginning to the execute command list function of the command queue. Comment creation and assignment of the variable, as using it along with direct2D will generate exceptions on this variable due to inconsistent variant transitions. Add the definition of renderer set2D render target. On it, call D311on12 device acquire grab resources, passing get address of the grab back buffer of the current index of the back buffer and a single resource. And call D2D1 device context set target, passing the direct2D render target of the current buffer. At the start of the present function, release the current grab back buffer using D311 on 12 device release grab resources, and do a D3D11 device context flush go to device utils.h and declare the function create DD311 on 12 device, for which we will pass the Direct3D12 device, the Direct3D12 command queue, a reference to a Direct3D11 device, a reference to a Direct3D11 on 12 device, a reference to a Direct3D11 device context, and a reference to a IDXGI device. Declare a function create D2D1 device, passing a IDXGI device, a reference to a ID2D1 factory 6, a reference to a ID2D1 device 5, and a reference to a ID2D1 device context 5. Define a template function of buffer count named update D2D1 render targets, on which we will pass the Direct3D11 on 12 device, the Direct2D1 device context, an array of Direct3D11 resources, a reference to an array of Direct3D11 resources with the size of the buffer count, and a reference to an array of Direct2D1 bitmaps also with the buffer count size. On it, we define a bitmap properties with the options of target and cannot draw, with the unknown pixel format, premultiply alpha, and a vertical and horizontal DPA value of 144. For each one of the buffers, create a flag of type D311 resource flag as bind render target. On call to Direct311 on 12 device, create grab resource, passing the Direct312 render target, the Direct311 resource flag, the input resource state of the render target, present as the output state resource, and the IID PPV args of the grab back buffer of the iterator index. In the iterator, do a cast of the grab back buffer to IDXGI surface, and create a bitmap from the surface with D2D1 device context, create bitmap from DXGI surface, passing the surface, the bitmap properties, and the Direct2D render targets for the index of the current iterator. Use the refactoring tools to create the definitions of create D3D11 on 12 device and create D2D1 device. Go to device utils CPP and create D3D11 on 12 device. Define a new unit of Direct3D11 flags with the create device BGRA support. If compiling in debug, use create device debug. Call D3D11 on 12 create device, passing the Direct3D12 device, the Direct3D11 flags, null pointer and 0 as its feature levels are interpret cast to a double pointer to EU unknown of the get address of the command queue, one num queue, 0 as node mask, and pointer to the Direct3D11 device, a pointer to the Direct3D11 device context, and null pointer as the chosen feature levels. Do a cast of the Direct3D11 device to the Direct3D11 on 12 device, and a cast of the Direct3D11 on 12 device to DXGI device. In the create T2D1 device function, create some factory options for Direct2D1. In debug, assign to its debug level information, call to D2D1 create factory with multi-threaded type, passing the UUID of the ID2D1 factory 6, the factory options, and a pointer to the D2D1 factory. Call to the create device method for this factory, passing the DXGI device and a pointer to the D2D1 device. On this D2D1 device, call create device context, passing device context options none, and a pointer to the D2D1 device context. Go to the folder view, add a new folder named 2D. Into this folder, add the next files: FPS text H, FPS text CPP, keyboard button CPP, keyboard button H, label H, label CPP, Xbox One button CPP, Xbox One button H, Xbox One view button H, Xbox One view button CPP. Now go back to the solution view, add a 2D filter, add to it all the files from the 2D folder. Let's start with FPS text H by declaring pragma once. Use the Microsoft WURL namespace, the DirectX namespace, and declare a FPS text struct. On it, declare a ID2D1 solid color brush as the text brush, an ID write text format as the text format, the initialize function for which pass the Direct2D1 device context and the direct write factory, and the render function for which we will pass the Direct2D1 device context and the number of frames per second of the application. Use the refactoring tools to create the definition of these functions. Go to FPS text CPP, include PCHH, include common DirectX helper H. In the initialize function, use the device context to create a solid color brush with the blanch almond color and passing a pointer to the text brush, and create a text format with DWrite factory create text format with the Verdana font, null as the font collection, font weight normal, style as normal, stretch as normal, 32 as the font size, some locale as PLPL, and a pointer to the text format declared in the struct. Assign the alignment to the text format with set text alignment with leading option, and its paragraph alignment with paragraph alignment near option. In the render function, call D2D1 device context begin draw. Call to D2D1 device context set transform, passing a 3x2 floating point identity matrix. Define a D2D1 rect with 10 for the left, 10 for the top, 250 for the right, and 30 for the bottom. Generate a white string with the numbers of frames on each second. Call D2D1 device context draw text, passing the CSTR of the white string, the length of the white string, the text format, the rect on which the text will be drawn, and the text brush created by initialize. And call D2D1 device context and draw to end the text drawing. Go to keyboard button H, add pragma once, use the Microsoft WRL namespace, the DirectX namespace, declare a keyboard button struct, 3 ID2D1 solid color brushes, one for the button color, one for when the button is pressed, and another one for the button text color. An ID write text format as the text format, a std string with the text of the button's label. Declare the initialize function, passing the Direct2D1 device context, a direct write factory, a std string with the text, a D2D1 color F for the text color, and the font size with 32 as its default size. Declare the render function, passing the Direct2D1 device context, the X and Y coordinates for positioning the button, and a boolean to indicate if the key is pressed or not. Use the refactoring tools to create the definitions of these functions. Go to keyboard button CPP, include PCHH, include common DirectX helper H. In the keyboard button initialize method, create a solid color brush with D2D1 device context, create solid color brush, passing the color of the label and a pointer to the text brush. Another solid color brush with black as its color for the button brush. A color with hex value 0xECDB33 to be used when the key is pressed. Create a text format using Verdana font without a font collection with normal weight, normal style, normal stretch, using the font size from the function parameters, a local like PLPL, and a pointer to the text format. Set the text format alignment as centered and the text format paragraph alignment as centered. Copy the button text to button label. In the keyboard button render method, call D2D1 device context begin draw. Call D2D1 device context set transform, passing a 3x2 floating point identity matrix. Create a D2D1 rect with 40x40 dimensions using the X and Y coordinates for its center. A rounded rect using D2D1 rect and 5 as its radius for the X and Y axis. Call D2D1 device context fill rounded rect, passing the rounded rect and the button brush. If the key is pressed, call to D2D1 device context draw a rounded rectangle, passing the rounded rect, the pressed brush, and 3 as the rectangle's width. Call to D2D1 device context draw text, passing the CSTR of the button label, the length of the button label, the text format, the rect of the button, and to create a text brush for the button text. And finally, call to D2D1 device context and draw. Go to label H, add pragma once, use the Microsoft WRL namespace, the DirectX namespace, declare a label struct, add a ID2D1 solid color brush for the text color, an ID write text format as the text format, an initialize function for which we will pass the Direct2D1 device context, a direct write factory, the font size, a dwrite text alignment for the text alignment, a dwrite paragraph alignment for the paragraph alignment, and a D2D1 color F for the text color with a default value of Indian red. And the render function for which we will pass the Direct2D1 device context and the X and Y coordinates, the width and height, and the text to draw. Use the refactoring tools to create the definitions of these functions. Go to label CPP, include PCHH, include common DirectX helper H in the label initialize method, create a solid color brush with D2D1 device context, create solid color brush, passing the color of the label and a pointer to the text brush. Create a text format using Verdana font without a font collection with normal weight, normal style, normal stretch, using the font size from the function parameters, a local like PLPL, and a pointer to the text format. Assign the text format alignment and the text format paragraph alignment. In label render, call D2D1 device context begin draw. Call to D2D1 device context set transform, passing a 3x2 floating point identity matrix. Create a D2D1 rect with left as X, top as Y, right as X plus width, and bottom as Y plus height. Call D2D1 device context draw text, passing the CSTR of the buttons label, the length of the buttons label, the text format, the rect, and the text brush. And finally call to D2D1 device context and draw. Go to Xbox1 button H, add pragma once, use the Microsoft WRL namespace, the DirectX namespace, declare a Xbox1 button struct, 3 ID2D1 solid color brushes, one for the button color, one for when the button is pressed, and another one for the button text color. An ID write text format as a text format, a stdw string with the text of the buttons label, declare the initialize function, passing the Direct2D1 device context, a direct write factory, a stdw string with the text, a D2D1 color F for the text color, and the font size with 32 as its default size. Declare the render function, passing the Direct2D1 device context, the X and Y coordinates for the position of the button, and a boolean to indicate if the button is pressed or not. Use the refactoring tools to define the functions. Go to Xbox1 button CPP, include PCHH, common DirectX helper, in Xbox1 button initialize, create a solid color brush with D2D1 device context, create solid color brush, passing the color of the label and a pointer to the text brush. Another solid color brush with black as its color for the button brush, and a color with the hex value of 0xECDV33 to be used when the button is pressed. Create a text format using Verdana font without a font collection with normal weight, normal style, normal stretch, using 32 as the font size, a locale like PLPL, and a pointer to the text format. Set the text format alignment as center and the text format paragraph alignment as center. Copy the button text to button label. In Xbox1 button render, call D2D1 device context begin draw. Call to D2D1 device context set transform, passing a 3x2 floating point identity matrix. Create a D2D1 rect with left as X minus 10, top as Y minus 10, right as X plus 10, and bottom as Y plus 10. Create a D2D1 ellipse to make a circle with X and Y coordinates as its center and 20 as the X and Y axis radius. Call to D2D1 device context fill ellipse, passing the circle and a buttons brush. If the button is pressed, call D2D1 device context draw ellipse, passing the circle, the press brush, and 3 as the width of the ellipse. Call D2D1 device context draw text, passing the CSTR of the button label, the length of the label, the text format, the button's rect, and the brush of the button's text. And call to D2D1 device context and draw to end the button's drawing. Go to Xbox One View button Edge, add Pragma ones, use the Microsoft WRL namespace, the DirectX namespace, declare a Xbox One View button struct, two ID2D1 solid color brushes, one for the button color and another one for when the button is pressed. An array of ID2D1 path geometry for the drawing points of the view button, an ID2D1 solid color brush for the drawing color of the view button. Declare an initialize method passing the Direct2D1 device context and a Direct2D1 factory. A render method on which we will pass the Direct2D1 device context, the X and Y coordinates of the button, and a boolean which tell us if the button is pressed or not. Use the refactoring tools to create the definitions of these functions. Go to Xbox One View button CPP, include PCHH, common DirectX helper, in Xbox One View button initialize. Declare an array of D2D1.2f with coordinates for the first square of the view button figure, and another array with the coordinates for the second square of the same figure. Declare a pointer to a D2D1 geometry sync as null. Create the path geometry with D2D1 factory create path geometry, passing a pointer to the first view geometry. Open the view geometry 0 with open, passing a pointer to the D2D1 geometry sync. Assign the mode as fill mode winding for the sync. Start the figure with begin figure, passing the first point of the first set of coordinates and figure begin fill. Add the lines with add lines, passing a pointer to the next point and the number of points left in the figure. And end the figure with end figure, passing figure end open and closing the geometry sync with close. Create another path geometry with D2D1 factory create path geometry, passing a pointer to the second view geometry. Open the view geometry 1 with open, passing a pointer to the D2D1 geometry sync. Assign the mode as fill mode winding for the sync. Start the figure with begin figure, passing the first point of the second set of coordinates and figure begin fill. Add the lines with add lines, passing a pointer to the next point and the numbers of points left in the figure. And end the figure with end figure, passing figure end close and closing the geometry sync with close. Create 3 solid color brushes with D2D1 device context create solid color brush. Black for the button, 0xECDV33 for the button border, and white for the view button figure. In Xbox One View button render, call D2D1 device context begin draw. Call to D2D1 device context set transform, passing a 3x2 floating point identity matrix. Create a D2D1 rect with left as x-5, top as y-5, right as x plus 5, and bottom as y plus 5. Create a D2D1 ellipse to make a circle with x and y coordinates as its center and 10 as the x and y axis radius. Call to D2D1 device context fill ellipse, passing the circle and the button brush. If the button is pressed, call to D2D1 device context draw ellipse, passing the circle, the press brush, and 3 as the ellipse width. Generate a translation matrix with coordinate x-5 and y-5. Assign this translation matrix to Direct2D1 device context with D2D1 device context set transform. Draw the figures inside the button with D2D1 device context draw geometry using the view geometry 0, the view brush, and 1 as its width. Draw the next figure using the same function with view geometry 1. And finish the drawing with D2D1 device context and draw. Save and run the application. You can use the keyboard to activate and deactivate the lights. Toggle the full screen with the spacebar. Toggle the lighting model with the L key. If you connect the gamepad buttons will be drawn on the screen. And you can use the view button to toggle the illumination model.